Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. It's a Sunday morning, the fourth Sunday in Ordinary Time. This is Father Warner D'Souza, and I want to welcome you to these teachings that I do. We've been studying on Sundays the Gospel of Matthew, while on weekdays we're doing the Gospel of Mark. We are in chapter 5, verse 1 to 12. I've done this teaching before, but I'm going to do it again. I've entitled this teaching, A Description, Not a Prescription. So, a description, not a prescription. Now, this is basically the text on the Beatitudes. So I'm going to read it because it's great even just listening to the Beatitudes from time to time. It's a great spiritual text to read. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. The Gospel of the Lord. Now, my dear friends, Matthew's Gospel is often referred to as the teaching Gospel. There's a very simple way to remember all the Gospels. Mark is the doing Gospel. Jesus is constantly working miracles and battling and fighting the evil one. Matthew's Gospel is the teaching Gospel, and I'll explain to you why. Luke's Gospel is the feeling Gospel. You'll see a very compassionate Jesus who cares for the poor, he cares for women, he cares for the orphan. There's a great tenderness in Luke's Gospel. So these are the three Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke. John is not part of what are called the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew, Mark and Luke are Synoptic Gospels. Synoptic comes from the word to see together. To see together. So when you look at Matthew, Mark and Luke, they are common. So there are things in common, because remember that Mark was the first Gospel written, and Matthew and Luke borrowed very, very heavily from Mark. They added their own material, and then they took the sayings of Jesus from another source, which we call the Q source. Now, I'm not going to get into a scriptural class, but Matthew's Gospel is often referred to as the teaching Gospel. And here's why. Because if you look at Matthew's Gospel, it contains 5 great chunks of teachings, what we call the 5 great discourses, into which Matthew has gathered so much of his teaching material. Now, let's understand who was Matthew writing to. Who did he write this Gospel for? Now, Matthew was writing to what we call a Judeo-Christian audience. These were people who were once Jews, now followers of Christ. We call them a Judeo-Christian audience. And he's writing somewhere as late as 75 to 90 AD. So when you look at this Gospel, you also see that in a sense that this Gospel has very strong overtones of a family feud. A family feud between the Jews and the Christians. Remember, we are all we all come from the same stock. We are all Semitic religions. We come from Shem. But there is this kind of family feud between Jews and Christians, Jews and the Jewish Christians, or the Judeo-Christian culture that we see in the Gospel of Matthew. So let me explain this a little so that I can explain the text itself. You know, in the year 80 AD, the Jewish rabbis of Germania decided to place the Christians, or the Jewish Christians, the followers of Christ, they decided to place them outside the community of Judaism. There was something called the Birkat Haminim. the Birkat Haminim was a curse that was pronounced on heretics, and now the heretics also included these Judeo-Christians, and it set the Christian community very firmly outside the boundaries of Judaism. You have nothing more to do with Judaism. Something that the community of St. Matthew will say, nothing doing, we want to contest this, we are part of the Jewish community. So you will also see in the Gospel of Matthew, he'll speak of their synagogue. Watch for that, okay? In their synagogue, yeah? Not ours, but their synagogue. So you see this family feud taking place in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, Matthew's Gospel has two clear focuses. The first is that Jesus is the Christ, and the second, that the kingdom of God that he proclaims will break soon upon the world at any time. Now, the Gospel of today is the opening verses of the first of the 5 discourses. Yeah, chapter 5, 6, and 7 is commonly known as the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, the Sermon on the Mount. Now, what will you find in this? Enunciated in this sermon are some of the key attitudes that a Christian disciple must live by. Now, who is the intended hearers? The intended hearers at that time was these Judeo-Christians, Jews who are now become followers of Christ. So the intended hearers of the sermon were the disciples, these Judeo-Christian disciples. But today we are told the crowds were also present. They were not barred from the message of Jesus. So they're all listening to it. Incidentally, when you come to the end of chapter 7, verse 28, it is the crowds who, having heard the Sermon on the Mount, then begin to react to the words of Jesus. Now, I think if Michelangelo had the Last Judgment, which is painted in the Sistine Chapel, if that was his masterpiece of his work, then this, the Sermon on the Mount, could well be St. Matthew's masterpiece. St. Matthew brilliantly weaves the teachings of Jesus in this opening discourse, and he sets down very clearly the mind of Jesus, his master. At the heart of this Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, 6, 7, is the theme of justice and also the theme of the kingdom of God. What Matthew will do is he'll grip the reader with the unadulterated teaching of the kingdom, leaving you and me wondering, how can values such as meekness and poverty and mourning and hunger, how can these values that we hear in the Beatitudes bring one really happiness? He gets you really thinking. Now, coming to the Beatitudes, I want to say this very clearly, that the Beatitudes are not some pious hope. It's not some pie in the sky when you die. But the Beatitudes, this very word, Makarios, blessed, the very word was meant to be a congratulation. When Jesus says, blessed are the poor in spirit, it is a recognition of an existing state of happiness that you and I, the disciples, freely choose to live. We choose this beatitude to live, this meekness, this merciful, this pure in heart. We choose to live it freely. And Jesus says, congratulations. Congratulations that you choose this when the world doesn't choose it. So while these virtues may may seem to sound in a way out of style, to be out of step with the rest of the world, these are the values that indeed that you and I are called as disciples to walk as a sign to the world, that the world looking at us and says, what's wrong with these people? They believe in being pure in spirit. The whole world today is talking about being immoral, and here they want to talk about being pure. The whole world talks about career changes and being powerful, and today we're talking about being meek and humble. Now, when you look at the Beatitudes, another thing that you'll realize, my dear friends, is that the Beatitudes are not a list of what I would call thou shalt nots. Yeah, it's not like the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments is you shall not, you shall not, you shall not. The Beatitudes are not a list of thou shalt nots. The list we find here, if you read it in the Greek, it's in the indicative mood, not in the imperative mood. And that is why I say it's a description, it's not a prescription, it's not you have to. That would be a prescription. It is a description of the life of a Christian. However, in following them, in following these descriptions, we also find the blessings of being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. Now, though the description of the kingdom sounds very bleak, the takeaway from those who have lived this experience of what we find in the Beatitudes, the takeaway for those who have lived it is an experience of authentic happiness. This is what truly brings us happiness. In the Sundays to come, we will continue right up till the 21st of February. We'll continue to look at the Gospel of Matthew and we'll study it closely, especially the Sermon on the Mount. I want to wish today, in a very, very special way, Bishop Dominic Savio Fernandez, who is the rector at present of the Holy Name Cathedral, also the auxiliary bishop of Bombay, and at one point of time Bishop Dominic Savio was a priest in this parish of St. Stephen's. He's greatly loved by the parishioners till today. He's seen as a friend, as one can go to, and personally I have a great affection for Bishop Dominic Savio. He's always available, though now being at Holy Name, being both a rector as well as a bishop, he has several challenges when it comes to his time. I always complain that he doesn't give us enough of time. But happy birthday, Bishop Dominic Savio. God bless you for your ministry, for your love, especially for the poor, your kindness. I must say this, the bishops in Bombay are so different, so down to earth, so kind. Bishop Dominic Savio is always available. Sometimes I think he does work he shouldn't be doing, including picking up papers from one end and delivering them to the other end. But that's the beauty of who he is. So God bless you, Bishop Dominic Savio, on behalf of all our parishioners here at St. Stephen's. And we do hope you'll accept our invitation. I hope somebody tells you that Father Warner was complaining very bitterly with a big smile on his face that you don't visit us enough. Do come over, and we would love to also have you and share the person you are with our parish. God bless you to everybody else. Have a good day. Have a blessed Sunday. Don't forget to like this video, share it, leave your comments, and keep well, everybody. I'll see you again tomorrow. Start of a new week, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock is with me always, Father Warner. Bye for now.